What did you realize your mom taught your ex to scam you? For 2 years, I had cherished the quiet. After my divorce from Rachel, the silence in my apartment was a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the constant noise of our marriage. A noise amplified tenfold by the ever-present, ever-critical voice of my mother. We didn't have children, Rachel and I, so the split should have been a clean break, a surgical removal of a tumultuous chapter. I had begun to rebuild, focusing on my career, nurturing the fragile peace I'd fought so hard for. I truly believe the drama was behind me, but I had failed to account for one immutable force of nature: my mother's relentless need to control everything and everyone in her orbit. To understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to understand my mother. She is a woman who sees life as a chess game where everyone else is a pawn for her to maneuver. Growing up, her control was absolute. She vetted my friends, dictated my hobbies, and laid out my clothes for school well into my teenage years. I held on to the naive hope that marriage would be my declaration of independence, a final severing of the puppeteer's strings. But marrying Rachel only gave my mother a new, more complex stage on which to perform her machinations. She meddled in our finances, criticized Rachel's housekeeping, and offered unsolicited opinions on everything from our vacation plans to the way I loaded the dishwasher. The divorce, I thought, was my true liberation. In cutting ties with Rachel, I assumed my connection to that particular brand of chaos would wither and die. I had grossly underestimated my mother's tenacity. The first volley in the new war came 3 months ago, in the form of a casual, almost friendly text from Rachel. It was the first I'd heard from her in over a year. "Hey, hope you're well. Things are a little tough right now." I ignored it. A few days later, another message arrived, this time with a picture of a little boy with bright blue eyes and blonde hair. "This is Leo. He's 2 now. He was a cute kid, but he was a stranger. Rachel got pregnant a full year after our divorce was finalized. He was unequivocally not my son." Then the messages took a sharp turn. "I really need some help. Leo needs things, and I can't manage on my own." The implication was clear, but the audacity was breathtaking. I wasn't her husband, I wasn't this child's father, and I certainly wasn't her safety net. I continued to ignore her, assuming it was a desperate, misguided attempt to solve her own problems. But Rachel's desperation quickly morphed into aggression. The text became demands. She started leaving voicemails, her voice laced with a venomous entitlement, threatening to take me to court, claiming I had a moral obligation to support the child of the woman I was once married to. It was ludicrous, a legal fantasy, and I brushed it off. The real shock, the one that sent a jolt of cold confusion through my system, was when my mother became her echo. The phone call started, incessant and demanding. "You need to do the right thing, son," she'd begin, her tone dripping with false maternal wisdom. "That poor woman is struggling, and you have a responsibility to help." I tried to reason with her, explaining the simple, biological fact that the child was not mine. It was like talking to a brick wall. Her arguments became more and more unhinged. "You were her husband once. That creates a bond. You need to show some compassion." Finally, she played her trump card. "If you refuse to do the right thing and pay her what she's owed," she said, her voice turning to ice, "I will take you to court myself. I will not have a son who abandons his responsibilities." I was dumbfounded. Why was my own mother championing my ex-wife's absurd extortion attempt? Why was she so deeply, fanatically invested in a situation that had nothing to do with her? The threat of taking me to court was so far beyond the pale that a dark suspicion began to bloom in my mind. This wasn't just my mother's typical, overbearing meddling. This was something else. This was a coordinated attack. Driven by that gnawing unease, I decided to confront her. I drove to her house, forgoing the usual courtesy call. I let myself in with the spare key she insisted I keep, and was about to call out to her when I heard her voice from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone conspiratorial and low. I froze in the hallway, hidden from view, and listened. The voice on the other end was tinny and faint, but unmistakably Rachel's. "He's not even responding to my texts anymore," Rachel was saying, her voice a frustrated whine. "I don't think the guilt trip is working. You have to be more forceful," my mother coached, her voice smooth and practiced. "Threaten his reputation. Mentioning the courts was a good start, but you need to follow through. Men like him, and his father, they only respond to pressure." My blood turned to ice. They were actively strategizing. Then, my mother delivered the line that blew my world apart. "Listen to me, Rachel. I've been managing his father for 20 years since our divorce. It's the same principle. You establish a need, You tie it to the child, and you never, ever let them see the full picture of your finances. I've been getting a little support from my son for years, long after he needed it. It's easy. Your ex-husband is just like his father. A little bit of guilt, a little bit of legal jargon, and they fold. The air was stolen from my lungs. It was a scam. A long-running, multi-decade scam. My mother had been systematically siphoning money from my father for years, using me as the justification, and was now teaching her trade to my ex-wife. Rachel wasn't just desperate. She was an apprentice, learning from a master of manipulation. In that single, horrifying moment, the lens through which I viewed my mother shattered. She wasn't just controlling. She was a predator. She was greedy, disloyal, and utterly devoid of a moral compass. And she was grooming Rachel to be her proxy, to continue the family business of emotional and financial extortion. The fury that rose in me was cold and clear. They wanted to play a dirty game, a game of manipulation and lies. Fine, I would play too, but I would play by the rules of the law, and I would burn their entire corrupt enterprise to the ground. The first step was to build an arsenal. I became a meticulous archivist of their campaign of harassment. Every venomous text from Rachel, every guilt-laden voicemail from my mother, every call log was saved, screenshotted, and backed up. I began recording all our phone calls, my state having one-party consent. Their voices, dripping with manipulation and threats, became the cornerstones of my case. The crown jewel, of course, was the memory of that overheard conversation, a detailed account of which I immediately transcribed and had notarized. It was a direct confession of their collusion, a roadmap of their shared intent to extort me. My next call was to my father. It was a conversation I had been dreading for years, a conversation that would force us to confront the deep, painful chasms my mother had carved between us. Our relationship had always been strained, filtered through her lens of grievances and perceived slights. But he deserved to know the truth. He deserved to know he wasn't just a divorced husband. He was the victim of a long con. I laid it all out for him on the phone, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I told him about Rachel, her son, and the demand for child support. Then, I told him what I had overheard. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was a choked whisper. The shock gave way to a deep, wounded hurt, and then, finally, to a simmering, righteous anger. For 2 decades, he had been sending money, believing it was for my benefit, a way to ensure I never wanted for anything. He had trusted her. All the while, she had been using his love for me as a weapon against him, funding her lifestyle with his misplaced sense of duty. The betrayal was absolute. Reunited by this shared wound, we became a team. My father, galvanized by 2 decades of deception, hired a forensic accountant and a pit bull of a lawyer. They began to meticulously dissect the financial history between him and my mother. The picture that emerged was staggering. Thousands upon thousands of dollars, meticulously documented payments for school trips I never took, college supplies for a son who had already graduated, and emergency medical funds for a man in perfect health. She had used the money to pay for luxury vacations, designer clothes, and, in a particularly galling twist, had even used it to help pay off some of Rachel's credit card debt during our marriage. We were armed and ready. My lawyer filed a motion for a declaratory judgment, a legal preemptive strike to formally sever any and all connection between me and Rachel's child. We included DNA test results from a private lab confirming what we already knew. My father, in turn, filed a lawsuit against my mother for fraud, misrepresentation, and unjust enrichment. We had a mountain of evidence, bank statements, recorded conversations, and now a united front. The day the process servers arrived at their respective doors, the fallout was immediate and spectacular. Rachel's frivolous claim for child support disintegrated under the barest legal scrutiny. With no biological link and no legal standing, the court dismissed her case with prejudice, meaning she could never file it again. She was humiliated and, for the moment, silenced. My mother's battle was more protracted. She fought back with the ferocity of a cornered animal. She hired a lawyer and tried to paint herself as a wronged, devoted mother. She claimed the money from my father was a gift, a voluntary contribution from a guilty ex-husband. She argued that her efforts to help Rachel were born of pure compassion for a struggling single mother. But the evidence was irrefutable. The recorded phone calls, the bank records showing the money being spent on herself, it all painted a damning picture. During a preliminary hearing, Under the pressure of my father's lawyer's relentless questioning, my mother's composure finally cracked. She broke down in a fit of theatrical sobs and tried to throw Rachel under the bus, claiming the younger woman had manipulated her, preying on her good nature. It was a pathetic, desperate gambit. The timeline of her financial deception proved her schemes had started long before Rachel was ever in the picture. In the end, the court ordered her to repay a significant portion of the money she had fraudulently obtained from my father. The judgment was a public record, a permanent stain on the pristine image she had so carefully cultivated. As for me, I performed the final, necessary surgery. I cut my mother out of my life. It was a decision born not of anger, but of a grim necessity. I blocked her number, her email, her social media. I sent a carefully worded message to the extended family, laying out the unvarnished facts, preempting the sob story I knew she was already crafting. The war was won, the immediate threats neutralized. But even in the quiet aftermath, a sense of unease lingered. I had won the battle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that with two women this vindictive and resourceful, the war was far from over. The initial victory in court felt like a breath of fresh air after months of suffocating tension, but the peace was fleeting. I had foolishly assumed that legal defeat and public humiliation would be enough to deter Rachel and my mother. Instead, it seemed only to have stoked the fires of their resentment. They regrouped, re-strategized, and launched a new offensive, this time on a different battlefield, the court of public opinion. Rachel, unable to extort me through legal channels, began a calculated and vicious smear campaign on social media. She posted long, rambling statuses filled with crocodile tears and righteous indignation. She painted a picture of herself as a valiant single mother and me as a cold, heartless deadbeat who had abandoned my son. She tagged me in photos of Leo, writing captions like, "It's so hard doing this alone when his father refuses to even acknowledge he exists." The posts were a masterclass in manipulation, filled with just enough vague, emotional language to be believable to an uninformed audience. The comments section became a cesspool of judgment from strangers and a few of her gullible friends. My phone started buzzing with notifications from old high school acquaintances and distant cousins. "Hey, saw Rachel's post. What's going on, man?" The embarrassment was a hot flush that spread across my neck and face. I spent days putting out fires, patiently explaining the truth. Sometimes even sending screenshots of the court order to prove my case. It was humiliating and exhausting. Rachel was attempting to weaponize social pressure, to shame me into submission where the law had failed. Simultaneously, my mother began her own insidious campaign, working through the family grapevine. My aunt, her sister, called me, her voice thick with misplaced sympathy for my mother. "Your mother is just devastated," she said. "She doesn't understand why you're being so cruel. She was only trying to do what she thought was right." My mother had spun her a tale of a selfless grandmother figure, trying to help a struggling young woman, only to be viciously attacked by her ungrateful son and bitter ex-husband. I calmly walked my aunt through the evidence, playing her a portion of the recorded phone call. The silence on her end was telling. She apologized, flustered, but the call was a stark reminder of my mother's power to twist reality, to paint herself as the perpetual victim. The most painful part of this entire ordeal has been watching its effect on my dad. Vindicated in court, yes, but the emotional toll has been immense. The discovery of the decades-long financial deception forced him to re-examine his entire marriage and divorce. "How could I have been so blind?" he asked me one night, his voice heavy with regret. He felt like a fool for trusting her, for allowing himself to be so thoroughly taken advantage of. This painful reflection spurred him to action. He began digging through boxes of old financial records from the attic, unearthing more and more discrepancies, a breadcrumb trail of my mother's greed. Payments she had claimed were for my orthodontist were actually for spa weekends. Money she had requested for my failing math grade had coincided perfectly with a shopping spree at a high-end department store. Each discovery was another small knife twist, but it also strengthened his resolve. He and his lawyer were now exploring further legal avenues to recover more of what was stolen. In the midst of this escalating chaos, I received a message that nearly knocked me off my feet. It was a Facebook request from Rachel's current partner, Chris, the biological father of her child. His message was short and apologetic. He said he had no idea she had been harassing me for child support and was horrified by her behavior. He explained that their relationship was on the rocks, largely because of her constant financial demands and her refusal to be honest about their situation. I didn't respond, wary of being pulled into another vortex of their drama. But his message was a crack of light in a very dark room. It was validation. It wasn't just me. Rachel's destructive behavior was leaving a trail of wreckage everywhere she went. Armed with this new reality, I took my lawyer's advice and escalated my own legal strategy. We filed a formal complaint against Rachel for defamation and libel. The social media posts were clear, malicious, and causing demonstrable harm to my reputation. We also began documenting every interaction with my extended family, creating a clear record of my mother's attempts to manipulate them into harassing me on her behalf. One of my cousins, horrified by my mother's actions, even agreed to provide a sworn statement about the lies she had been spreading. But the retaliation was swift and terrifying. A few days ago, I got a call from my landlord about an anonymous complaint. Someone had reported me for illegal activities in my apartment. I knew instantly who was behind it. That evening, 2 police officers appeared at my door. They were professional, but the implication was clear. I explained the ongoing harassment, and since they had no warrant, they left. But the experience left me shaken. To know they would go that far, to try and entangle me with law enforcement based on a complete fabrication, was a terrifying escalation. The very next night, someone tried to jimmy the lock on my car in the apartment parking lot. They were scared off by a neighbor, but they left a note tucked under the windshield wiper. The crudely written message was unambiguous. "You think you're so smart, but you'll regret this." I installed security cameras the next day. A dash cam for my car and a camera pointed at my apartment door. I was no longer just defending my reputation. I was protecting my physical safety. The paranoia began to creep in a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. Every unexpected knock, every unrecognized number on my phone sent my heart racing. But through it all, one positive thing has emerged: my relationship with my dad. Stripped of my mother's constant interference, we've started to truly connect for the first time. We talk almost every day, not as a father and a distant son, but as 2 men who have survived the same storm. We are allies, bound by a shared, painful truth. It's a bittersweet reconciliation, born from betrayal, but it's real, and it's become my anchor in this tempest. I thought the anonymous police tip and the attempted break-in were the peak of their desperation, but I was wrong. The final act of this twisted drama began with another unexpected Facebook message, this time from Chris, Rachel's ex-partner. He wanted to meet. He said he had information that I needed to hear in person. Wary but intrigued, and with my lawyer's cautious approval, I agreed. We met at a sterile, anonymous coffee shop. Chris looked tired, a man worn down by Rachel's particular brand of chaos. He told me he had finally left her. The constant lies and financial pressure had become unbearable. And he dropped the bombshell. He had been cleaning out his things from her shared apartment and found a box of Rachel's old belongings. Inside, he'd found a series of letters. They were from my mother, written to Rachel shortly after our divorce. The letters were a horrifying blueprint for their entire scheme. My mother had coached Rachel on how to play the victim, advised her on which legal threats would be most effective, and detailed her own successful strategy with my father as a case study. But there was one more thing. Chris pulled out his phone and showed me a text exchange between Rachel and my mother from the night of the attempted car break-in. My mother had texted, "Is it done? Did you leave the note?" Rachel had replied, "Yes. He'll get the message." It was the smoking gun, a direct link between my mother and the escalating harassment. Chris agreed to provide the texts and letters as evidence. He was done with her lies and wanted to ensure his son would be safe from her influence. This was the moment of decision. I could have taken this new evidence and simply fortified my legal position. But I was done being reactive. I was done living in fear. It was time to confront them, to end this on my own terms. I went to Rachel's apartment first. When she opened the door, the color drained from her face. Before she could launch into a defense, I told her I had spoken to Chris. I told her I had the letters. I told her I had the text messages about the car. For the first time, she was utterly defeated. The bravado, the entitlement, it all crumbled, leaving behind a pathetic, desperate woman. She confessed everything, sobbing about her debts and her fear of being a failure. I felt a fleeting moment of pity, not for her, but for the child caught in the middle of her mess. I told her I wouldn't press criminal charges on one condition. She would sign a legally binding no-contact agreement and publicly retract her lies about me online. My final stop was my mother's house. I walked in, and she greeted me with a frosty hostility, attempting to seize control of the situation. I let her speak, let her spin her web of self-pity and blame. She accused me of betraying the family, of siding with my father, of being a cruel and ungrateful son. I listened patiently, and when she was finally out of breath, I calmly laid the letters and the printed text messages on her coffee table. She stared at them, her face a mask of disbelief, her manipulative machinations laid bare in her own handwriting. Her denial was weak, her justifications pathetic. It was all for my own good, she claimed, to teach me a lesson about loyalty. In that moment, I saw her with perfect, painful clarity. She was incapable of remorse because, in her twisted worldview, she had done nothing wrong. I'm done, I said, the words feeling more freeing than any I had ever spoken. Done with the lies, the games, the manipulation. We are done. I walked out of that house and did not look back. Since that day, a fragile peace has settled over my life. Rachel, true to her word, posted a public apology on her social media, admitting her claims about me were false and born of desperation. She and my mom both signed the no-contact agreements. Chris is now working through the courts to establish a formal custody agreement for Leo, ensuring the child is protected. I haven't heard a single word from my mother, and I intend to keep it that way. The legal battles are over, the threats have ceased. The paranoia is slowly fading, replaced by a quiet confidence. This ordeal has cost me a mother, but it has given me back my father. It has taught me the high price of peace and the strength it takes to fight for it. It was a messy, brutal, and painful chapter, but the chapter one have finally, mercifully closed.